I wanted to comment on just spiritual YouTubers in general. There seems to be more and more of spiritual YouTubers, including myself. I question if I'm qualified to do it. I'm questioning if others are qualified to do it. People create whole courses and whole books, and they have hundreds of thousands of subscribers to their YouTube channels. And, I just question the validity of those people. Obviously, some of them have had spiritual experiences. And to some extent, we've all had spiritual experiences. But, they're talking about like out-of-body experiences potentially, right? And then they have this experience, they come back, and they think, I've solved it. I can now teach what I've learned personally. Like my subjective experience now is an objective reality that everyone can tap into. And I would just disagree with the premise of that, because it seems like they go out and have this experience and then they come back and it's more of a mystical experience that inflates their sense of knowing what reality is, rather than following a strict sort of guideline that spiritual science gives us. This kind of illusion that people have that they are spiritual experts is just an interesting thing to observe. And I think that I also noticed that a lot of these same people have a feeling of we are all one. So if I take, even this thing, this is me, right? And this is me, and this crystal is me, and all of this types of stuff. And to some extent, that is correct. To some extent, they are right to say that we are all one. And that is a great concept to have with us. Christ says to love our neighbor as ourself. And we can think of that as a reality because we are all one human race and we are on this evolutionary path of spiritual evolution together. But the problem with it is that they let go of the ego to get to that point of non-dualism. So we actually have to be able to observe the things around us with our ego still intact, and understanding those things around us on a spiritual level and a conceptual level, using our thinking. It's actually an elevated level of thinking. So Steiner talks about the 6 basic exercises, which involves controlling your thinking. And so a lot of this non-dualism is also like, none of my thoughts are mine, and just completely sort of letting go of any attempt to enhance cognition, right? Enhance our thinking. Rather they think, let me let go of the thinking and kind of merge into this sort of primeval view of things. And this is actually a longing of the human being to go back to a former time where we actually had a consciousness that was more absorbed into our environment, where we actually didn't have an ego. We actually had less of an ego than we do now after Christ has united himself with humanity and with the earth. So now, we actually have to develop that I with the ability to understand things around us spiritually. And so it's kind of like we have to do both. Like we've already sort of had the experience of more of an animal-like experience, more of a group soul-like experience of sort of emerging with our environment. And this comes from, Atlantis and Lemuria and like past epochs that we've been in, tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago and even beyond, where we did merge, even past planetary cycles, where, we were still present there and we sort of were merging with our environment in a way, and we were relying on other spiritual beings to be our I or our ego, in the sense. And now we have to cultivate our own ego. And in some ways, this is why we face such a crisis in our time now, is people are waking up spiritually. And this is causing psychological and physical illnesses because people don't really know how to handle it. And so they would rather give that up in a way. And this is unconscious, by the way. So most people that are in this movement or this sort of non-dual spirituality YouTube, existence that that people have, which is fine. That's the path that they're on. But it is sort of a almost wanting to let go of the ability to take control of our own thinking and our own feeling and our own willing. And so it actually kind of takes the responsibility off of us, because a lot of these, and me included, experiencing psychological issues and maybe saying, I don't want these thoughts, right? These intrusive thoughts. I don't really want to take responsibility for those. I kind of just want to allow them to do their own thing and kind of allow them to exist within my soul, and sort of, just kind of merging into a single consciousness. That's kind of what people are doing with this non-dualistic frame of mind. I would just say that according to spiritual science and spiritual scientific indications that have been given by Rudolf Steiner, this is not exactly the path we want to go on. It may be an initial way of, having a spiritual existence and understanding spiritualism. It may be a way to do that. But to progress in evolution, we have a little bit been abandoned by the spiritual world, in a sense. And it's abandoned in a sense that they are not the controller or the purveyor or the creator or the director of our life, right? We now have been given freedom. We have an ego. We can do kind of whatever we want, right? And so it's like, that's why it's such a difficult time now, is because there's so much responsibility that we have to take. And yet we've been given unlimited capabilities, unlimited possibilities of moral, options, things that we can do in life that maybe aren't the best, right? Aren't the best moral options for us. There's unlimited capacity to do that now with the digital environment that we live in, to make those choices. And I think that we just have to understand that we're in a transition point, and obviously, there's many YouTube YouTubers that are saying that now as well, that, we're splitting off into like good and evil races and all of that stuff. And again, to a degree, that is true, but it's over a longer period of time. And time can speed up. Steiner also said that, and it's possible that it has. But we still should, theoretically, according to spiritual science, have at least a few more incarnations before this real splitting off will kind of harden and sort of really take place. And so we have time, to take the responsibility on ourselves and change our disposition of soul, right? As Christ says, change the disposition of your soul, for the kingdom of heaven is upon us, which means it's within you, it's here. And that's the I, that's that ego organization that he's saying is here now. And so that's what he's saying, is we really have to take responsibility for that ourselves. And that's kind of how we're developing for the future, so that we can become more like Christ, so that we can actually heal other people, to actually take the Christ impulse and the Christ principle into ourselves, to transform our ego into the higher ego, which Christ has given us the opportunity to do. And so it's just important, really, really important, to understand what's happening out there in the spiritual community, and the tendency that it seems to be taking is this tendency towards unification and a general sort of abstract, non-specific view of consciousness, or the terminology of consciousness that's thrown around a lot. But what exactly does that mean? And the answer that they'll typically give is that it just means, our spirit. They might say that, but it's like we're all sort of this one consciousness, right? And I think Rudolf Steiner would say that's sort of this melting into a primeval soup of sorts of a group soul, right? That's going backwards in time. We already had those. We had tribes, right? That sort of group soul existence. And now we are in the transition point. And since Steiner started speaking on these topics, since really 1900, these things are picking up the pace now. And that's kind of what he said, is we would collectively be crossing the threshold, that the I and would begin to awaken, more, and that we would have an expansion from our physical body, and our etheric body would actually start to expand outwards. And around 1900, it was the closest it was ever going to get to the physical body. And then we had the ability to expand. And that is sort of the adversaries that we face as well in this world, want to kind of harden the physical and the etheric body together and keep it together. And I think a lot of people are awakening, and it's positive, and this is all positive stuff. I'm not going to say this is totally negative, but we just have to be aware of what the true path is. And I think that it's just about getting the information out there, essentially. I mean, it's not like these people can kind of hold a candle or argue against what Rudolf Steiner said, if they give it the time and the effort and the pain that it might take to actually go through and study spiritual science. If it was given that opportunity by these same people, I'm sure, and an openness, and I'm sure that they would come to the conclusion that spiritual science is the right path. But it's very important that people come to that conclusion on their own. I'm not going to tell them that they need to do anything, but it's important to come full circle, and maybe starting at that one consciousness is good, because we come from the sort of religious background in America as millennials, as Gen Xers of baby boomers, where we were taken to church, traditional religion, fire and brimstone, guilt, sin. You can only come through the church to have a relationship with God. It was very dualistic. It was like the church, and God, and, whatever. There's sort of that dualism there where people actually had to go through the church to have a relationship with God. And it's totally understandable that we sort of separate ourselves from that kind of materialistic aspect of religion to then go towards this totally sort of only spiritual consciousness, right? Where the reality of science and, the reality of those things actually just disappears. Like, we're all sort of one. We're going to be absorbed into the one after we die, and we don't actually maintain our ego and our personal self and our personal karma that we actually have to go through in the next incarnation. In a way, there is a karmic aspect that people talk about, and in these circles, but it is sort of this ultimate goal, which again has a partial truth of being absorbed back into this sort of one consciousness. But we're on a path to become more individual consciousness that can actually give away our love even to the gods, and that we can actually do this in an individual way. Just like we all have guardian angels, right? We all have these guardian angels. It's not like we have one angel who's guarding everybody, right? We have our own guardian angels, and they're individuals, just like us. And we actually are going to become like them, and maybe eventually will be guarding over another individual, right? So that's kind of our evolutionary pathway, to become more like angels. And this sort of absorption into the one is a little bit becoming kind of more like animal existence, because it's going backwards into this group soul, sort of primeval soup of this kind of one consciousness. And it's the same with the scientific conception of things. That's kind of going backwards as well into this kind of animalistic tendency, or Darwinistic sort of mindset, where they actually are thinking we're going to live forever on the physical plane as animals, right? And maybe the one consciousness side of things thinks we're going to live forever as in a spiritual existence, as sort of this group souls kind of one consciousness type thing. So they're different polarities, and what I think what Christ wants us to do is be in the middle of those two polarities. And so I think that's what spiritual science and anthroposophy is all about. It's about finding the middle way between these two poles. And I just think it's so important for our time. And I really appreciate if you're out there listening to this broadcast, this podcast that I'm trying to do today, that's off the cuff, and just trying to keep up with the content creation of these YouTubers, these scientific AI, accelerationists. Again, the non-dualism sort of movement, the psychedelic movement, which kind of goes more towards this one consciousness movement. So there's all of these things that are coming to pass. And really, this is all part of the awakening process for humanity. And I think that the reason I make videos is so that people maybe can just come across something that I believe, and that anthroposophists believe, is the right path for our spiritual evolution. And it's not easy, right? I think a lot of times it may be easier to be in the scientific camp because, there's no like inconvenient truths that you need to like process and go through, right? It's just kind of everything is material. We're gonna, connect with the machine and everything will be great. And same with the other side. It's like none of these thoughts are mine. I can just absorb into everything around me, which is nice to do once in a while, right? To just kind of zone out and just be like, we're all one. It's nice to do that sometimes, but we need to be very careful in our time to not lose our eye, because that is the awakener. That is the true self. So, we just don't want to get lost. And I hope that the message has come through clearly for you today. If it has, please subscribe to the channel, because again, my channel, I don't put out a ton of stuff, but it seems like these non-dualistic channels just go crazy. Like they get automatically, 10,000 subscribers. And I'm not saying I even want that. I don't necessarily even want that. But if this is something that resonates with you, that you're trying to find a middle path, that you're open to spiritual scientific truths, and that you're willing to go through the process of understanding anthroposophy, which I think many anthroposophists would agree is important, then I'm open to you subscribing to the channel. So thank you, and have a great day, and have a great Christmas season.